My name is Patrick Parks. I'm with Disability Advocates of Kent County, for those of you I haven't had the pleasure of meeting yet. And I just wanted to start by thanking all of you. This is a pretty special anniversary for us. This is the 5th year anniversary of this Absolutely Accessible Kent workshop that we have been running. And I start with a thank you because 5 years, a 5-year run doesn't happen without all of you and our wonderful community partners and supporters. So I want to also give a special shout out to our speakers today, whom we'll introduce in a little bit, but give an extra special shout out as well to our sponsors, our event sponsors who help make this possible. And so with that, our lead sponsor this year is Pioneer Construction. We'd also like to thank Beeler Young, ADA Michigan. Is that coming through okay, guys, or are you hearing feedback? I'm hearing feedback, so I apologize. American Institute of Architects, the Grand Rapids chapter, Gerald R. Ford International Airport, Downtown Grand Rapids, Inc., Mobile GR, Peckham, Fishbeck, Kendall College of Art and Design, and Matheson and Matheson. So thank you to those wonderful supporters for their continued support and their work in helping us to put this together. And in thinking about, I mentioned a 5-year anniversary. Thinking about a 5-year anniversary, I've learned, and in researching kind of the significance of a 5th year, I've learned that in anniversaries and sometimes these occasions, there's a theme material, and that's wood. Typically in 5-year anniversaries, people get a wooden gift, right? And that signifies, you know, the durability and the lasting durability and the deep roots that wood kind of symbolizes. And yes, I understand we got lucky this year with wood as a natural building element for our, an event focused on architecture and urban planning. But all kidding and cliche aside, I share it today because our conversations this year strike me as sharing a theme of these deep roots that we talk about, right? So over next door in the architecture track with Nome, they'll be spending some time asking questions that take us back to the root of for whom are we designing? And in this track here in urban planning, we're going to be seeing how, for better or for worse, the roots of accessible and inaccessible urban design stem from how cities view and prioritize accessibility. And then finally, in our keynote address with Randy Lewis, we'll learn from the Walgreens story how placing accessibility and inclusion at the root of a major corporation's culture hasn't just been a nice thing to do, but rather a key driver for the organization's success. And so as a last note from me before I introduce Steve here as our main track speaker, for those of us in this room, we will be staying in this room for our keynote address, so we won't have to move anywhere. The folks in the other room will be joining us as we move into that portion of the program. And so with that, I'd like to introduce our speaker today, Steve Wright. Steve has nearly 4 decades of experience in urban design, planning, architecture, mobility, and universal design. He's presented at the National Conference of the American Planning Association and at the International Making Cities Livable Forum in Paris. His storytelling and reporting frequently appears in Planning Magazine, so you may have read some of his work. And this focuses on both DEI and also creating a better built environment for people with disabilities. He's also a globally recognized photographer. He's exhibited photographs of his urban work in places like Istanbul, Paris, Barcelona, Cairo, London, Buenos Aires, Rio de Janeiro, and countless other cities in North America as well. And lastly, he's published more than 5,000 professional articles on best practices for creating inclusive places and has made daily blog entries as well as social media posts on disability advocacy for more than a decade. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Steve Wright.
I kind of smacked my hand and I said, why isn't the main entrance just beveled? Again, this is not the pyramids. You opened this within the last decade. Why? And I also feel, because what we're all here for, that this is not some sort of earn your way to heaven or help an outlier. When Ron Mace invented universal design, he didn't call it wheelchair design or disability design. He knew that it helped everyone. It helped us age in place. It helped young families with strollers. So it's kind of like, and not to mention, one of my college roommates went into risk management. And I'm kind of guessing when you have a little two-step thing there and you already put a yellow across it, you're pretty much telegraphing, we made this a tripping hazard. So again, it's kind of like, why do we still do this in a built environment is my propelling question. So enough of the semi-handsome devil up there close in place. Again, don't really need to narrate that. That's just to show that all the nice things Patrick said about me are largely verifiable. So again, I know we're kind of preaching to the choir, but if nothing else, maybe you go back and you have a firm leader or a community development leader or a permitting person or a city or county official that's still kind of pig-headed and says, well, we didn't do it this way for when I started, why should we now? Like I said, if I have anything that's critical of the design profession, I'm not knocking the individuals in the room. It's just sort of we're not there yet. So again, I have so many people say, well, I Googled and it's something like 3.3 million people use a wheelchair for mobility 50% of their time. That's such an outlier. Why don't we just heal them or buy those iBot, stair climbing chairs? Let's fix the person. And it's kind of like 1 in 4 people? That doesn't look like an outlier to me. That looks like a marketing tool. That looks like if I'm building my apartment building and I want to capture empty nesters that are aging in place, I want to design so they're move-in ready and they have a walk-in shower. And I think we all know those can look beautiful. They don't have to look battleship gray. So may well be talking to the choir, but back in Miami, I have several architects, friends, sometimes colleagues that they come up to me and say, Steve, you dabble in this, and your mom had a disability, and your former partner used a wheelchair for mobility, and you were their attendant. Why, can I get some kind of variance? It's such a small building, or the pro forma is so tight. Can I just waive this? It's like we got a zoning waiver, or we didn't have to build a dumpster bin for this new building. Can you waive it? And it's like, guys, gals, it's a civil right. This would be like coming to me and say, Steve, it's leap year. Can I fire everybody for being pregnant that day? Or can I fire them for having a different shade of skin or a different belief system than me? And yet I still get professionals who probably make 10 times what I do and get to stamp plans and put their name on the cornerstone saying, isn't there a workaround? And it's like, for my money, there's not a workaround humanity. There's not a workaround for dignity. Again, I guess I preempted myself, but again, I just keep underlining that it's a civil rights. Yes, it's incorporated into all 50 states' building code, but it's not just some little nice fad of the month design tool. It's about dignity. It's about mainstreaming. I don't think I don't think it has a blue or red color as in political. If you're a bottom line person on not wanting to pay taxes or whatever, then build the darn stuff good, make more accessible housing, and there'll be more, people with disabilities will not be under and unemployed, and that solves your issue. So really doesn't matter which part of the political tree you fall off on, it's a no-brainer. You just want to belong. You just want to cross the streets safely. There's so many times I go somewhere and everybody wants to show me the new library with the elevator or the wide entrance, and it's like, that's lovely, but you're in Michigan. You have thaw and freeze. It's like your crosswalk is murder to get over. I almost tripped to my death. It's just, why would you want a huge percentage of your population not being able to cross the street safely? I'm going to preempt myself, maybe it's a later picture, but when I was in downtown Detroit, they're all thrilled because so many of those buildings were vacant and the old Hudson's department store site is finally getting an infill site, but it's been closed 3 years on the sidewalk for a staging material. And yes, our brothers in the general construction, the GC industry, they will take half of your city's footprint as a staging area if you give it to them. They will take they'll take a half a mile if you allow. It's the dollars speak. It's easier. It's cheaper. Don't do that. I'm a nerd. I go to state fairs and collect old postcards. I've got pictures of the Empire State Building being built and the Chrysler Building in New York. That's 100 years ago, darn near? Guess what? There's scaffolding. Human beings traversed the sidewalk at 34th and 5th, and maybe there were 2 days it was closed for a concrete pour or some big steel moving in, but the other 363 days. In my Miami, the dollar bill rules, we will close down the sidewalk for 3-4 years, which, as we know, if you are a person with disability, you're working in office, maybe there's a Walgreens just 4 doors up, you've got to cross a busy street 4 times for your round trip just to run out and get whatever, a thing of breath mints. Why would you want to subject yourself to all those crossings? Again, it's universal. Certainly our focus today is on disability and inclusion, but who wants to get stuck out in a monsoon rain? Who wants to get snowed on crossing a street? It makes no sense to me why places do that. This is a little bit dated with the COVID, but I think since we're sort of reimagining outdoor dining sheds and the hybrid of work from home, I think it's a great opportunity to, while we're rethinking all that, let's rethink how we can be more inclusive. Almost everywhere I go, somebody catches me in the hallway or sends me a follow-up email, and they have this fabulous idea because they're dipping into a grant, or it's the one time the building manager's leveraging the $40,000 in capital funds. They say, oh, while we do this, we're going to really make a unisex restroom that really works, or we're going to remove 3 doors that you have to go through that are heavy, not automatic doors to make it to the bathroom. And I'm like, wow, that's a great idea. That'll make my next slideshow. It's just such a truism. It amazes me how many people have the ableist attitudes and say, well, it's some special thing, or doesn't the ADA just give you $4,000 a month to live off of? And it's kind of like, even if it did, why would you not want to go out and immerse yourself? Who wants to just, other than COVID, who wants to shelter in place? Kind of goes the companion with, is there a variance? I know with some historic properties there's a few workarounds, but Ocean Drive on Miami Beach, we have so many of these narrow frontage places, and they just look at me like, well, if a person in a chair comes, we'll carry them up, or we'll sit them in our sister property, and you're kind of thinking like, they want to be right on Ocean Drive. They don't want to be 4 blocks in. Why are we still doing these crazy workarounds? And I'll get to my other point with that. Even some of my beloved park planners will give me this. Well, Steve, that's an exercise place. We'll have one fishing pier part on the river that has an access ramp, or maybe if you tell me you have a wheelchair basketball team, we'll reinforce the court or whatever. And it's like, my neighbor in Miami, she actually just got a great job in Houston. She's from Cuba. She was an Olympian there, got a rare virus, uses a chair for mobility. She was a Paralympic gold medalist cyclist. If she's having a flare-up, I think people don't see the accessibility part of it. They don't understand that when you do those dockless bikes, that there are adaptive bicycles. It's almost like, you're either Mark Spitz, to really date my age, or Michael Phelps, the swimmer coming out of the Olympics, or you're other. It's like people don't realize these ranges. It's like, there's a lot of paras and tetra, et cetera, that use all kinds of equipment. And yet I sometimes get parks people saying, well, how about this little postage stamp corner of our 3 acres is accessibility, and we'll just ignore the rest? It's like, no. Yeah, I'm stealing this from a friend of mine, but I like that saying, and I think that's, again, if you happen to have a coworker, a colleague, a permitting person, a city manager, a downtown development authority part that's being resistant, it's like, if you're doing that, again, I am a progressive. I very much expect people to be treated fairly no matter what religion, what ethnicity, what gender orientation, etc. But if you were doing this, if you hire a VP of diversity and they have no care or training at all about disabilities, you're doing it dead wrong. Again, somebody a lot smarter than me. I could live 10 lifetimes. I'm not going to have a PhD after my name. But again, it's like, I get that so many times, like, well, we design it for the normal people, and then we make the adaptations. And I'm kind of like, what's your definition of normal? Are you 5'10"? I happen to be, I guess, a 5'10" white male who's relatively able-bodied, but if I'm the only one normal, does that mean a PhD who's an Indian American or a Pakistani doesn't get the job? Or as a transgender person who's going to cure cancer, not even get a shot because they're quote unquote not normative? To me, this goes so much with dignity and civil rights. It's not just a little building trick or a planning policy. Yeah, I guess I preempted myself, but and yet we still, airplanes. I know we're just starting to think. It was a big thing in the news where they're having a possible Delta's developing a roll your power chair on board, but we still design seating on airplanes, the hotel rooms, everything is based on that 5'10" male body, and it's just foolishness. Women are not that average height, and we just keep, they're like these design standards made at the end of World War II, and we just keep pushing that rock up the hill, and we've got to break that mold. One of my faves, again, maybe I'm just kind of seesawing the same point over and over, but I get so many folks telling me, well, it must be terrible to be disabled. You work with all those folks and their pain, and I don't know if I could get out of bed, or maybe we should just cheer them for rolling out of bed. And I'm kind of like, well, this is very pejorative. This is almost like this is like the horribleness of saying a black person is a credit to their race or something. It's silly. It's like you're diverse in your doing. You don't get this patronizing pat on the head thing. But to fill in the further blank with that, I have yet to meet a person with any definable disability that it's not the built environment or the lack of policy. All of that is what is keeping them from being the project manager, the corner office, the going back to school, the feeding their family, the leading independently. It's rarely, if ever, the underlying condition. We just, as a society, we just keep flipping up so many barriers and making it so difficult. I have had 100 different people challenging me, saying that, no, you're all wrong, and I said, well, then prove me wrong. And they just said, no, there has to be. How can it not be? How can less than 1% of housing be accessible, move-in ready? And almost all that's multifamily, which in an urban setting, multifamily is great, but certainly you have a right to have a backyard and your kids and your pool or whatever you want. And it just, I don't feel, some people like to incentivize it. I know a planner sometimes, the carrot and stick, but I'm not so sure that we really need to be giving extra incentives to develop accessibly. I think it's a market trend. I think I've got a slide I'm preempting myself on that. AARP is finding that we're older as a nation than we've ever been before, and another 25 years from now, the amount of people over 65 will double. This is a market share. It's not some sort of a do-gooder. Again, I wish I could have met Ron Mace, but I kind of said this earlier, but it's just, I like to say in Miami on Lincoln Road, we have our Latinas that seems like 6-inch heel is a flat there, and if you have a smooth surface, if you have ramped entrances versus 10 different kinds of little tiny faux marble and weird pavers that break up, and we don't even have thaw and freeze like you do, but I'm a fan of pigmented concrete. I think that looks just fine with wayfinding, or to say that you're in the historic whatever district. I hate these. Pavers are just, the minute you put them in, they're already just wanting to break, they're wanting to separate, and again, my former partner had rheumatoid arthritis. When she could get somewhere, but if it was a bunch of pavers and it was 4 different surfaces and everybody tried to get fancy, there's times we go on the road by 1 o'clock, she needed to take a break for the rest of the day. Her hip joints had just been pounded. Why? Nobody else pays $400 a night Manhattan hotel rooms to make it a half a day. So why? I just, it's like, I think somebody in the 70s on some urban renewal program said, if you put little horse head things at the bottom of your lampposts, and if you do brick pavers, or if you make herringbone for your alleyway, it'll be cool and everybody will come back. And I don't know about this audience, but if I've been somewhere really fun, it's usually the restaurants, the buildings, the museums. I don't think I really go ape over what my tennis shoes touched. So I would strongly, when you do your urban design, I would strongly reconsider all these different little pavers and pebbles and fake cobblestones. Even in an area that already has cobblestones, and that's part of the heritage. One of my clients in Lisbon, they're just pouring smooth sidewalk down the middle of it. Now, There are some very narrows, if anybody's ever been to Lisbon, that you can't fit that. But any of the plazas, any of the largos, they're just so everybody can still feel the little tiles in the ground and the cobbles and take pictures. But as far as traversing accessibly, they just build a 5-foot wide smooth pathway. The only kick in the butt is the pathway is so smooth and popular when they have an art fair or a farmer's market, they set their tents up on it, and then we have to go tell them to move it out of the way, you're blocking it. Yeah, I think we've all seen that, where there's something that's quote unquote a disability or an adaptation thing, and it's so comfortable that the whole town loves it, even though, again, not naming names, but a particular deputy city manager or new head of planning says, oh, this is horrible, they're going to hate that, we're ripping out the guts of our history. Don't buy it. Yeah, again, I know we're in a market-driven society with all these folks aging, and with what things cost nowadays for housing, the millennials, unless they have a trust fund, are not particularly wealthy. So again, I don't feel like this is a special needs. I think that's a pejorative term. It's not an outlier. Again, most of my thing is aimed towards public sector and trying to regulate or encourage more inclusion, but I got to think there's a lot of developers that eventually the light bulb's going to go off and feel like, this is not a lost leader, or this is not, can I do 10% and stamp it and go home? I think they're going to, I know a woman that's the second biggest developer of assisted living centers, and her first model had all tub showers. It was almost like this defy the need. Because some marketing person said, oh, when the family tours and if they see a roll-in, they're going to say, oh, mom's not ready for that. Mom's already had a fractured hip and mom can barely get around. But it's like this psychological, like you're giving in. And she paid a small fortune to retrofit. So from now on, even if you're a younger age or even if you're memory care, it's a roll-in. So you don't have to move units. You can age and exist, quality of life in place. I hate it when architects, and I don't want to keep picking on that profession, but if they come to me, and again, I'm not a plans examiner, I'm not an architect, I probably can't read halfway decent shop drawings, but I hate it when they pick out something that says, well, this looks like a VA hospital, or, oh, this looks like a MASH unit, or this looks like Battleship Gray and smells of urine. And I'm like, only because you willed it to be like that. It's like, I can't think of his name, Michael Graves, the famous architect who passed away a few years ago, who had a virus that he was using a power chair. He designed these showers, he designed these hospital rooms that are they look like the Ritz-Carlton, and they were only about 10% more than the standard, so nobody was breaking the bank. Look at all those Alessi spoons and all those ones that had the thicker end that originally were for people with disabilities, and now they're just cool because if you're bad a cook as me and you're actually trying to make something good, the spoon doesn't fly out of your hand or you don't burn yourself. I don't know if anybody knows, one of my buddies, she's getting up there in years, Eleanor Smith from suburban Georgia. She invented the idea of visitability because everybody said, well, Eleanor, you got a grant, we made your home accessible, you should, whatever, you should just kick up your feet and see all rainbows. And she says, well, that's interesting because I want to be part of my community crime patrol. I want to talk about building a library. I want to walk dogs. I can't visit any of my neighbors. They're all up porches. They're all up steps. And I'm like, oh, we'll carry you. It's like, no, I don't think anybody out here, whether you're able-bodied or have a disability or invisible, I don't think you want to come me, grab you around your arms or stick my finger by your rear end and pick you up and throw you over my shoulder. I think it'd be kind of invasive, even if I'm a fairly nice guy and halfway cleaned up. And if we don't know that, I say as we know, if you don't know that, that's what you're doing when you grab the wheelchair. Now, perhaps if there's a fire to push you out of the way of a speeding train, but you routinely do not want to get to the theater or the restaurant or your buddy's house by being picked up. It's doggone invasive. Not to mention, for some reason, well-meaning lay people always grab it in the wrong way and break your chair. And that's on Saturday night. Come Monday, when you go have to pay the $1,800 out of pocket to fix your chair, they don't remember you. They don't pass the hat to not that you want to have your chair broken for 10 days or more while you wait for the parts anyway. But getting back to the thing, it's just as people say, well, Steve, remember that old saying, a man's home's his castle, which is not gender neutral to begin with, or just, it's a private sector. We can't will this. They'll revolt. And it's like, it's 3 little easy baby things. I would even add, in my hotel room, and I'm not in an accessible room, it has a barn door. It has a barn door to separate like the seating area, and it has a barn door for the shower. It's it's perfectly counterweighted. I can move it with my little finger. There's your separation from hearing the dishwasher or the smelly dinner before you clean up the plates. It's just, and I keep getting people like, well, it has to be a 27-inch door. That's all we spec'd it for, and it has to have great big hinges. And it's like, why? I bought an old house in Miami, and I had to pay through the nose because the entrance of the bathroom was a load-bearing wall, and it was a tiny door. It wasn't fun. I don't know about you folks. I'd have much rather gone to the Big Island, Hawaii or something for what I gave a contractor to do the load-bearing wall. So if you do it right once, you don't have to do those things. The lever handle. I remember when that was like some sort of special outlier. You almost had to order it from Fred Salmon's catalog. Now every Lowe's, Home Depot, etc. has them. We like it. It's like, first everybody's, oh, that's weird, it's different. I don't want to feel like a disabled. If I say I'm disabled, I'm losing the battle. And it's like, now it's like, hey, I got an arm load of groceries. I can just elbow this. Isn't that cool? Closed captioning. I'm certainly not the first one to bring this up. I'm cribbing off another person, but that was a disability thing. Come 100%. Nobody envisioned that would be so popular. You go to any sports bar on earth that's closed captioned. You go to restaurants and they've got the food channel on and it's closed captioned, so you can hear Wolfgang Puck or whoever talk about how they made the souffle that cost me $8 at the grocery store and cost $80 at their table. Again, as you might tell, I'm a little bit obsessed with that resistance that, these are special things, or these are weird, or I feel uncomfortable. Or again, I've never seen anybody balloon up to 400 pounds because they did some ramps instead of the steps. I think I've got a slide after this that brings it all back home. But how many? I know some places with the automatic door opener, so many people are used to that. Again, if they've got the armload of coffee or whatever, they have to replace them or have to maintenance them more quickly than they thought, because they thought, well, 10% of my users need that or depend on that or what have you, so it'll last forever, and then everybody likes it. So all of a sudden, it's not a weird thing. It's a wonderful thing. It's my butt's about to get the freezing rain, and if I can step two steps quicker and hit the button, I'm in there. Miami Beach, the Moby mats. I don't want to say just a particular brand, but that's the one I know. And every person walks on that. They get less sand in their shoes. They take their coolers on wheels, hopefully not with beer in it, because that'd be against city ordinance, but we don't know. But yeah.
I'm Jenny. I worked for the local economic development organization. So I was born in June of 49 and had polio in December of 49. Yes, last of the polio people. This upsets me.
Huh.
This pisses me off. We are West Michigan. I cannot get down to the beach.
Wow.
I cannot. Now, it's going to be my thing I'm going to be talking to the DNR about.
Huh.
I'm not alone.
So there's no Moby mat or any other?
There is.
Wow.
There's one, and I have to spend a day and just videotape it.
Yeah.
There's one, and one year it only went halfway.
Well, yeah.
So 2 years ago at Grand Haven, I went to the area with all the handicap parking. Right? And so it's there. It's going to be the ramp down to the water halfway, 3/4. It wasn't there. They moved it to the mobile park because they wanted it down there for them. So for us, parking in the handicap spot, yes. And I will tell you, the baby boomers are coming. Wherever I go, every day.
Well,
They're pointing out.
no, I'm glad you brought it up, but I'm sure you see this, and I see this all the time. But I mean, again, I start to say Publix because that's our thing here. I guess I'll say Meijer to make it more local. But you ever notice a certain percentage of folks they don't want to admit that they have a respiratory or a mobility thing, but they're kind of leaning on their shopping cart as a mobility device?
The
That's gonna.
baby boomers are
that's going to quadruple just as,
So I look at every new house and they say, why does this have steps?
yeah, yeah.
I look at apartments, why does these
Well,
have steps?
to dovetail on yours, and this is one of my fights with the county because it's the city of Miami Beach, but then at a certain point it's the county. You know, you get these multi-jurisdictions, but they, again, it's like you said, the mat goes out halfway, and I said, well, why can't it go all the way? And they say, well, there's sea turtles, and I said, but that's like 8 weeks a year. And then they said, oh, it's environmental. I said, but you had a polo match and you had a fashion show. You know, you put in like, you know, a square mile of boards. So that sounds kind of prejudicial. So, you know.
The answer was, why would a person in a wheelchair want to go to the water?
Oh, crap. Yeah, I know.
That was the answer.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, and yet it's like a Paralympic sport, and you can just put your toes in, and there's about 8 different designs of floating chairs. And now, to bring it back home, another problem that Miami Beach does, not to pick on them, but they feel like a disability thing is, I don't know what, I think they think of it as like a 25-year-old, like they're ready for life, they've graduated college, they've got a little nest egg, just put it in once and throw them loose till they die. And I keep saying to them, no. Your accessibility equipment is a 3-year-old. You know, you wouldn't throw your 3-year-old into the, you know, whatever. You're not the Vikings or mythology. You're not going to throw them into a snowdrift and see if they make it, or you're not going to bring a kid to the edge of the highway and just see if they can cross the other side. You know, and it's like, you see, you know, that Moby mat, you know, it moves, it gets covered with stuff. When they rake the beach, the trucks go over it, and they just. It's almost like, well, there's a blue thing there. It must be good for life. And it's like, no. You know, would you like to jump in the? And I'm not a big fan of that. Engineer spends a half hour in the chair and then thinks they know the entire lifestyle. But you know, it's like, if it's a certain amount of bumpiness, you can't get by it, or you get thrown out of your chair. It's like, who does this? You know, it's like, nurture your adaptive equipment like a child. And don't treat people like a child, but your equipment needs maintenance. I maintain my body, you know, I'm getting up there in years. I can't just ignore it and expect it to fix itself. It's just weird to me where it's like, to me, that's one of my pet peeves with municipalities where it's ADA/universal design by checkmark. You know, it's like, hey, we did this in 1988, we're good, you know. It's like, whatever, you know. I think I could spell the word pastor, I'm going straight to heaven. It's like, nah, you got to do a little more than that. Again, you know, it's just. And this wasn't staged. This isn't like somebody sat out there that they got a sunburn. It's just everybody. You see people that look like you'd be a model on the cover of whatever magazine, and it's just this natural guide way. You know, even if they already have they're in their bare feet, so they don't mind the sand. It's like you have to fight tooth and nail to put one of them in, and then they have 5 because everybody loves it. To make you, well, you're still fighting that battle. You know. We're Miami, you know, we don't have anything but, you know, good-looking people and sunshine and great winters, so we kind of got a stock in trade in that. Yeah, my all-time pet peeve, and, you know, I don't know how many people here know all those different things. It's like the medical model and the social model and you know, unfortunately, we'll headlong into the 20th century, not that it's completely extinct, but we have that kind of thing that it's the person, you know, this poor SOB caught a disease, or they went off the diving board, they were born with CP. You know, we got to fix them, you know. Let's just get 6 of the modern day Jonas Salk to figure out how to reconnect their spinal cord. It's just, you know, they're broken people. They can't have a real life until we fix them. And sometimes I've gotten in trouble because maybe people don't understand my full circle for this, but I'm here to tell you, to me, that's every bit as insulting, foolish, pig-headed, maybe a cuss word is about to come to mind, as saying, hey, Steve, we have races in America. This is terrible. Let's bleach people of color so they look white so no one will be mean to them. And of which, you know, hopefully nobody's here nodding like that sounds like a good idea. It's a horrible idea, right? But why is it with the disability thing, there's still, and I'm not just talking like whatever, knuckle-dragging folks. I know folks that have 6 more degrees than me and a bank, you know, they shake their sofa and it looks like my life's savings. So they're achievers, they're educated, and yet they're carrying around these Bronze Age, you know, approaches to, again, there's nothing wrong with doing spinal cord research or making adaptive things, but just this obsession of you should be on the sidelines of life and twiddling your thumbs and praying to 6 deities and hoping that, you know, the miracle worker fixes you. That's insane. That's, again, that you know, it'd be like saying, you know, there's gender inequality, so we'll make everybody a male, and then they'll all make the, you know, instead of making your 82 cents an hour, you'd make your buck. It's like, I don't think we want to go do that. And yet, those sound absurd when it comes to disability. It feels like half the people are still like, you know, Steve, what about these? And again, Michael Graves had one of those. He was, you know, one of the New York Five, a superstar architect, designed incredible buildings, made a fortune. He was smart. He would teach in Princeton in the summer and in the University of Miami in the winter, and had a virus, and probably about the last decade of his life used a chair for mobility, and found out a lot of the buildings he built were horribly inaccessible and featured steps. He kind of, you know, had a dose of his own medicine. But you know, I talked to him. He would go to Rome. You know, again, he's probably worth $12 million if he was worth a dime. His iBot chair, and it was supposedly the most modern one, he paid $280 grand for it, and he got about 6 hours of useful life out of it. So all this idea of, you know, the person's broke, let's fit, you know, I don't want to redo my sports stadium with more accessible viewing lines or different areas, you know, to fix the, okay. I don't think most of us can spend 280 grand out of pocket and replace it. He actually he traveled with two because he wanted to live 12 hours. And again, you know, he's the 1%. You know, anybody in here that's used any kind of assisted mobility device, whether it was recovering from an injury or a permanent adaptation, knows that even if you got Cadillac health insurance with your company, usually they buy you the chair and then the repairs are out of pocket. Or even Medicare and Medicaid, it's a roundabout. Or they'll pay for a base chair, but they won't pay for the cushion that keeps you comfortable. So if we're fighting in that with the $2 grand things, I don't think we're going to be doling out the 280 grand anytime soon. No disrespect to the people that are trying to invent those things. And again, even if for some reason you pass the hat and you got a GoFundMe and you got your 300 grand, so you got the chair and some maintenance, who wants to just look at someone and say, you know, you're active 6 hours a day, you know, the rest just sit in the corner and twiddle your thumbs, you know, just, you know, we'll push in a corner like the sheltered workshop eras. Again, sometimes I get in trouble, but I use the other marginalized group example. You know, I don't want any, you know, every physician, every person that makes my life better in Miami is largely Hispanic origin because that's our majority thing. You know, I don't want some pig-headed, racist, bigoted person saying, you know, well, you know, Hispanic people, you know, that accent scares me. You know, we should only let them out from noon to 6 or something. You know, the other time I'm kind of suspicious. We should, you know, make an internment camp or something. And I know that sounds absurd, and yet the people that say, you know, damn you, I don't want to fix the built environment, fix the person, they're saying the exact same insidious stuff, this exact same craziness. Andre Stawani, one of the world's most famous planners, he's a former client and he's my neighbor, and he will just go to the ends of the earth saying it. Yeah, well, I grew up in an environment where we didn't have the ADA and we didn't stuff, so, you know, Steve, you're a smart and articulate guy. Why don't you go, you know, get all the billionaires to try to fund some sort of special device that fixes everybody? And it's like, you know, have a nice life, Andres, you know, cash your checks. Kind of back to my close the street thing. This is like, in my youth, I think I could have thrown a baseball and hit this. This is Calle Ocho, the world famous, you know, Cuban Main Street, Miami's most famous street. It's in all the ads, model shoots, etc. Some touristy, some really good restaurants if you know where to find them. But I took this picture was 2. It's now 3 years. They just opened the sidewalk back up. It's like an 8-story building. You know, again, don't want to sound like a broken record, you good folks, but there's 50-story, there's 80-story buildings in Philly, Boston, Manhattan that were built going on a century ago. You look at it, they had great big scaffolding because that's what, you know, back then we didn't all have Toyotas and Hondas, so people needed to get back and forth to work. I'd like to think we have technology and smarts. Maybe we would advance the ball a little bit in the 90 years in the interim, and yet, you know, again, you know, that developer loves that. It's a clean site. They don't have to have a, you know, there's not a perimeter fence. There's not guards. The trucks can deliver right up thing. I mean, you know, whatever, you know. Maybe I'd ask to work a 20-hour week if I wanted, but you don't have to give it to me. It just kills me where they roll over. Or they'll say, well, if we make them behave, they're going to go to the next city. It's like, I'm willing to take that risk. I want my stuff to be inclusive. This is also my neighborhood in Little Havana, where we griped and griped and griped about, yeah, whether it was for disability, whether it was elderly, whether it was just kids bicycling. We said, yeah, people are going too fast. They're going 35 miles an hour, and to a Miamian, 35 means go 50 until you get caught. Pretty much, yeah. And, you know, and then maybe blindfold yourself and give yourself a pedicure while you're doing it, while you're also dictating the novel on your phone. We're a little wacky. So we fought for some lowered speed limits. They said, well, you know, the cars won't know, the drivers won't know it. And you can tell those sidewalks are way too small. That shouldn't be a walkway into a garden shed, but that is what we have. And they're like, oh, we can't widen it because there are these giant light poles. And I'm like, no, you can change that too. So the thing to save lives and make pedestrians safer blocks the sidewalk from anyone that doesn't walk on two legs. So I think that's still there. Whatever. Nobody's ever gonna have me run for commissioner or mayor because I tweet out these things and call them out. And it's like, usually you shame somebody the third time, they kind of come correct. I mean, maybe if you're asking them for a Rolls Royce, but, you know, pull a stupid sign out of the ground, I'm guessing it in, you know, I'll take that job if it's more than $25 an hour, but yet it stays. I'm pretty sure, I'm actually trying to research this right now. I've got an architect that's much smarter than me trying to check each state building code, but every state I've ever worked or lectured in, having those Lula lifts meet the code. And again, you know, so, you know, I go to them and complain, and they said, it's in the code. You know, you're asking me to arrest for some of the crime that doesn't exist. And I say, you know, well, okay. Those all, at least anyone I've ever seen, use a key, and the key goes missing. 2, say the security guard has 24 hours, and they have the key. I roll up there. Let's see, I walk up the steps in my 200-pound chair or 300 pounds with my body in it, and oh, wait a minute, I can't do that, you know? It's like, why? I don't know what people are thinking, and we just keep replicating that. And in South Beach, we have some of those for half-story vertical transportation, and sorry, folks, but at 3 in the morning when somebody's clubbing, those become bathrooms. They become worse. Or if it's the secondary entrance into a restaurant or club, they put a big flower, you know, they get CO'd, they get it signed off on, then they put a giant flower pot in front of it because it's a secondary entrance, and they don't, you know, people will run out with a liquor bottle or run out on a $100 bill without paying, and they don't want to guard 2 doors. Well, you know, this is what happens when you segregate by intention. You know, and then you go to the city and like, well, they passed CO 10 years ago. And I'm like, yeah, but no one can use this. This has to upset you. It's like this weird circular argument. Again, maybe I'm rambling you good folks, but there's a brand new building, 330 units, 100 of them are affordable, which is probably $1 million a month considering what we charge people in Miami, but yeah, they're affordable, which is great, other market rate. It's in a floodplain. Thing's got to have 200 foot of frontage. No room to put a turn ramp. Yeah, right. It's got a Lula lift. It's not that exact one, but it's got that. Broke down. How do you have, you know, when somebody rented and moved all their stuff in, how do you get in and out to work? And I'm like, well, you can sort of use the parking garage. Like, yeah, but there's cars flying around there. You know, it's posted 4 miles an hour. They're flying around at 25 miles an hour, and they're going to hit the person. Are you going to, you know, you're going to send a car to their family when they get run over? It's just, again, it makes no sense to me. And every time I go to an architect or a city building person that says, well, my hands are tied, it's in the code. And I'm like, well, you've got a 10-year-old kid, right? And I'm like, yeah. I said, well, you know, God forbid they got hit by a car and they had a compound fracture and they went to the emergency room. It's like, you know, would you want the treating physician to throw a Tylenol and a Band-Aid at you and say, well, it's medicine, you know, I'm being disingenuous, but you wanted treatment, I just gave you treatment, go home. Because to me, it's that same kind of disingenuous thing. It's like, I don't care if the code says, you know, that Buddha and 16 deities bless it. It's like, I can prove to you that 9 out of 10 of these aren't functioning. If you're a public servant, you should be concerned. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, huh? No, that's the other part. No, they'll flood. Look, I get it. You need to, well, you know, we have some politicians that deny the sea level rise, but again, it's like South Beach hotels, some of those are like 40 feet wide frontage, and I've still seen turn ramps put in. And the biggest issue is maybe they lose one dining table if they have an outdoor cafe, and they have to police the bicyclists, because if you don't have enough bike racks, and you know, maybe they're mean bicyclists, maybe they just don't think. They just see a rail and it's close to where they went, and they know if they leave $1,200 bike unlocked, it's going to grow legs and never be back. But I just, like, I'm not anti-elevator, and I understand. There are some people with pulmonary issues, or depending on your upper body strength, you don't want to go a country mile on a ramp, and you can have, but it can't be the baseline thing. And you brought out now I'm going to have to revise my slide. Like I said, I always bring, I get somebody sells, I go back to feeling like I'm in a kindergarten, I'm learning, but no, it's like, no, that's bottom thing. The whole thing we're raising the building out of because of the floodplain, so the lobby doesn't flood, which is just granite or marble floor. The mechanical, literally most of my neighbors, their home air conditioning units, they've built like 3-foot pedestals for them. They're not flooding yet. I'm on a mountaintop. I'm 22 feet above sea level, so which, in Miami is like the top of the Matterhorn. But even there, they're starting to do that because, who wants to replace a $5,000 unit? But yeah, you make a great, So let's, and again, I don't think any architect or any mechanical engineer designs something for a 5-year life. I think they'd like to think, whether it's ego or pride or improving the built environment, that their building will last 50 or 100 years. Why would you have the only ingress for a significant amount of your end users crap out within a year? I know I'm probably harping on it, but I always, they say, well, it passed the inspection. I said, well, do you design roofs that are meant, the roof meant to fall in within a year? Or the first time we get more than a ½ inch of rain, and you just paint back and say, well, somebody drove by and stamped 4 seals and collected a permit fee and I was good. It's like, no difference. Yeah, I'm a city person. I don't want to live there, but I love visiting Manhattan. And again, it's what, 20%, 25% of the stations. Even though, Bloomberg was there, and 57th Avenue. There's like 100 buildings that every person lives in. It has to be a billionaire, and the entire skyline's changed, and it's like, oh yeah, but we're getting revenue. We're going to solve all our problems. It's like, I don't know. They must, maybe every friend of the mayor got to retire at age 40 or got a double pension or something, because I know the MTA is an independent body, but using the bully pulpit of the mayoralty, I think they could have built a lot more areas. Up until recently, a community council in New York could overrule an accessible station because if they felt like it infringed into their area. I don't know how that didn't have some monumental civil rights law to turn it over. But all I'll say with this is, just like Detroit with a people mover and Miami as a metro mover, if your city's ever getting transit, I know they like, the raised thing looks space age, and I know the traffic engineers like it because it doesn't take up a lane with the slower traffic, but I'll trade that. I'll trade the slower traffic every time. 1, makes safer for all pedestrians if the traffic is slowed. 2, if it's a little platform at grade, nothing breaks down. At the worst, maybe there's some unbelievable ice and the thing pops up, and then you pay $100 to put the 2 pavers or a new sidewalk in. Right now, and we have a very progressive mayor in Miami that used to be head of our Human Services Commission. I'm sorry, Miami-Dade. We're weird. We have a city mayor and a county mayor. But county mayor, who really is actually doing things and then beefed up the ADA department, et cetera. Right now, 5 of the 16 Metro Mover stations have had an elevator out 6 or more months. And it's like, well, the parts are back ordered, or well, the approved person through the RFP retired or went out of business. And it's like, I don't care if you have to go digging up the former East Germany or East Berlin. It's like, find it. It's just, this is the problem. Whenever you start adding gadgets and extra links, I like simplified for inclusion. And again, as you said, this is not just for Christopher Reeve or whatever. It's for pretty much all of us, because we're all going to live long enough that we're going to need ease of mobility and comfort, and we want our public's realm to be welcoming.
We had an esteemed individual with disability advocate through the quadriplegic, and he went to Manhattan, got down in one of the accessible entrances, but you're right, the other one was broken.
Yeah.
So he had to go several miles in the subway, under the subway, to find an exit to get out of there.
Oh, yeah. No, I remember as a newlywed, we got on around Union Station. We're supposed to get out in Midtown. We rode to Harlem to find the accessible station, and then we took a midnight bus. I mean, we got a tour. you know, we bumped on, you know how Manhattan's kind of hilly, you know, we bumped on every cross intersection until we thought we were back home to Ohio, but yeah. Like I said, this kind of, earlier I was saying that thing where sometimes I get that pushback, well, but I want, you know, I want Olmsted public spaces. I want to win an LSA award. I want to be beautiful. I think a disability is great, and it's like, that's your bigotry. That's not the reality. I know some friends have pointed out that, remember, this is in Canada because this is technically not ADA compliant because it has no rails along it. So it's kind of a halfway serving suggestion. But I thought it's an interesting thing. Going back to Manhattan, the very first leg of the High Line has that thing they call the urban window, and it's seating, and it's actually just like plexiglass where you can look up 10th Avenue. And it's got a meandering path through it. So again, you know, I hate that when you go to the movie theater and it's the stadium seating. It's like, okay, you can sit all the way in the back, or you sit up front, like, you know, injuring your neck looking at the thing. It's like, why isn't there different scattered sites? So that's a start towards it. This is Portland. I don't know. Maybe that's a bowl that actually traverses like an entire story. I mean, I don't know. It looks kind of cool to me. It looks a little tight there, but most of those River Army Corps things only had stairs down. I know this morning when I took my walk, I think there's one ramp at one of your bridges. I'm just trying to think to get to the water's edge here. It's certainly not the majority. Yeah. You know, maybe that's the ugliest spot. Maybe that's, with all due respect, maybe that's the homeless encampment. You know, when you segregate, again, my heart goes out to people, but you know, why do you want the dog's rear end of things? You know, it's like, why not 4 or 5 spots? But I guarantee you, if somebody rebids that, it's probably 50-50 that they'll think about adding ramps. Or again, they'll look in some book and try to justify saying, well, 1 out of 6 is good enough. One of my all-time favorites. I cannot think of the fellow's name, but he was an architect and the manager when they were redoing Millennium Park in downtown Chicago. And I have 2 different slides. I cut it back to 1, but there was a grand community center, and they wanted to look like the Spanish Steps in Rome, and huge steps, and it was going to have a lift in the back. And he was near retirement. He passed away a few years ago, and he was just like, over my dead body. He's like, yeah. You want to see a story in the Chicago, and this is before newspapers were small. Like, you want to see a thing in the Sun-Times and Tribune tomorrow about how exclusionary you're going to be? Dare me. And now it's on level ground. You know, it's flat. It's against the lake. It wasn't like they were carving it out of Mount Rushmore. They didn't have a floodplain issue. It was just somebody had been to Rome, and some architect wanted to show off and make all these balustrades and super duper stuff out of nothing. Like I said, you know. If you're in Pittsburgh and it's up the side of the Allegheny Funicular, you have some issues. But I even get stuff in Miami where people want to build stairs to nowhere. If you haven't been there, we're a swamp. We don't have a whole lot of, we don't have a topography to deal with. So people that induce it just bedevil me. But kind of the reward back, I want to say the fellow's name was Ed. I know he got a Paralyzed Veterans Architecture Award, but I think because he crowed so much about the community center being up these grand stairs and the accessible entrance being around behind, like we had to hide you or we were ashamed of you, that they built this big fountain, and it's only like 1/8 of an inch of water. So again, there's a power chair user, and obviously the machinery of a power chair rides pretty low. So I think there's no wake there because obviously you wouldn't want to break your machinery. But it was kind of a neat give back. Which again, that's the kind of thing where even the most benevolent of park planners might say, well, it's a water feature. Nobody in a chair would want to go there. Well, that looks kind of cool. I mean, if I were the marketing person for that and I was trying to get a New York Times story or get on the 6 o'clock news with Lester Holt, if I just show a picture of a fountain and say, oh, we paid some artist from Spain, $100,000 to come in, not interesting. If I show 3 people with varying disabilities out there in the middle of it, I might get a front page. I don't know. That sounds like a bonus to me. My mayor or city manager or president of my city council might pat me on the back and give me a corner office if I can get New York Times saying how smart we were. This actually had structural issues, completely unrelated to disability, but if you've ever been to Brooklyn Heights, this must go down 30 feet below, and it gently swings back and forth, and it's very wide. That's another issue sometimes where we make our accessible thing the minimum thing, and nobody ever contemplates 2 wheelchair users coming at the same time, or a person with a push cart, or It's an urban climate. There may be a person passed out. If a person's passed out and it's 9 feet wide, you can negotiate around it. If it's 4.5 done begrudgingly, you know, what do? You're on a date and you have to feel like a jackass and go all the way back up and cancel just because somebody begrudged another 4 feet of pavement or decking? Yeah. Just a nice, now again, they get a B- for this. It's very accessible and it's wide, but it's the faux brick pavers, which I'm a fan of pigmented concrete because, and again, that's not just a wheelchair mobility thing. I think it's a risk management and a maintenance thing. You know, I've yet to find a city saying we're so flush with cash, we're, name me 80 projects and we'll all get them done within a year's time, right? No, they all say they're strapped. So I don't want them to spend $4 million building a walkway and then another $2 fixing the little pavers that broke. I'd rather have them put pigmented concrete that pretty much lasts forever and then spend that $2 million on the accessible pool or the next site. That is one, I know. Again, you're going to give my homework times too, because this came up from one of the operations people for the Downtown Detroit Partnership, and they said, again, it's that old hippie thing, you brought me a problem without a solution, Steve. So yeah, my little calendar for when I get back to Miami is to find that and share it. There has to be something. But again, yeah. Well, I know there's that, it's almost like there's the recycled rubber and there's the pour in place that's permeable, but that's expensive. The only catch with that is, sometimes they spec it and say, well, you just reduced me to a quarter mile instead of a mile of it. Again, I don't think human rights and civil rights should never be a cost-benefit analysis, but if there's only so much budget, again, I just know that poured-in-place rubberized stuff that's permeable tends to be very expensive. But maybe if we did RFPs that demanded more inclusion and more consultants that understood universal design, maybe there'd be such a demand. Usually when something moves off the shelves more, the price comes down. My mom's first microwave was like $1,000. Now you can get a good one for $100. So maybe that solves itself with that. Yeah. One of the most traveled avenues in Miami, the gateway to Little Havana. Developer built that area. They were supposed to build an arcaded area. They used it for retail space. Nobody called them on it. I don't know what that is, maybe 5 feet wide. And they got an extra, extra 0.2 FAR. They gave them like 9 more units in their 100-unit building for putting in plantings. So instead of putting plantings anywhere else, they took their half out of the middle. And even when the trees were there, you could barely get by in a wheelchair. I mean, just if you had any kind of special adaptation or if you were carrying plans in you, you couldn't get by. And then the trees were so chintzy that they got snapped down. And yeah, it's a decent drop there. You're not going to fall to your death, but you don't want to roll down into that and get stuck. Now, another one of you're hearing, if nothing else, you're going to go home with Steve's pet peeves list. Send me a candy cane or whatever, we'll be even. But this is in Coral Gables. Very, very wealthy suburb of Miami. They closed a street, so it's fairly wide. It's not just like an alleyway. And instantly all these little kind of underdeveloping businesses were all sexy and happy, and everybody's out till 2 in the morning with their umbrella drinks and gourmet pizza and everything. It was a great economic development thing, but most of the buildings were from the 20s and 30s. And because it was new chain stores, they demoed them back to the studs, but their building permitting says, it's a historic building. Let's let them keep that, and we're talking 5 inches. Let's keep that threshold. We'll have an alternative way. Look what the alternative is. It's the high chairs in the back, and it's extra seats for the outdoor pad. Yeah. So, and again, and they say, well, if you call ahead, if you're bringing a disabled person, if you call ahead, and I'm just like, well, would you feel comfortable if a person was dressed as an Orthodox Jewish person and they had to call it? Everybody else could just come through. Or would you be happy if a Haitian American was somehow second-class status? Like, well, if you call and get a letter from your priest and you send us an email, we'll think about it. But that manager will probably quit, and we'll still. It's like, part of the American experience is spontaneity. When we create these secondary segregating things, we rob people with disabilities of spontaneity. Again, we're sort of doing that. Well, it used to be horrible. You couldn't even leave. You should be so happy. And again, well, there are prejudiced people in America, but I don't want anyone to say, you're this marginalized group, you should be so happy that we don't punch you, or whatever, your religion, you're a female and you wear a hijab or something, and just because you got to walk to work without getting spat on, you should be happy. It's like I kind of want my inclusion threshold to be beyond that. And yet, when it's the disability realm, we basically say it in the same language. This is the front. We're not asking someone to blow up the Grand Canyon and make it accessible, or to, whatever, blow up Mount Rainier because I can't build a ramp that's 1 to 12. It's a crappy little 4-inch maybe. And again, this did not send mom and pop to the poorhouse. This is Fredo's an Argentine gelato chain. They're expanding like crazy in South Florida. I know that building. Used to be a little law office. They blew up that entire thing back to the studs. I mean, but what would that have been? 3% of the entire budget? 1.5% to make a level threshold? What building department perpetuates this? How do they, I feel like that person should retire or maybe explore new career opportunities. Yeah. Because we want to be all Spanish, we have paseos, and they're very narrow and they're actually not lit well enough, but it's a ritzy place. But when you don't police it, when you don't have code enforcement going through, and most of the disability blockade code enforcement, if you fix it, they don't fine you. And I'm like, about the 4th time, you need to do a draconian fine, the wallet talks. Look back there. There's a trash receptacle. There's where you throw the dirty dishes. There's chairs stacked up. In the back, if you notice, there's a little bit of a guideway thing for a dumpster. There is a painted pad for you to put down the industrial dumpster for all the restaurants to use as a common repository. But because this is so crappy and they never police it to make it accessible for all, they push it over a little bit. The other side of this has one of the coolest bookstores. They have readings from every author you'd ever want to know. Otherwise, now again, you're not going to get snow and ice in Miami, but we do get our monsoons. Right about now, it's raining every day from 4 to 6. So if I stand up and suck in my gut and go sideways, I'm good. But if you're any kind of mobility device, you get soaked to the gills going to the end block and back again. Not the world I want. This is from New Orleans. Every once in a while I get somebody say, you know all those wheelchair people. And I'm like, that's pejorative the way you stated that. But anyway, I know what you're getting at. Like, why don't you tell them, get out of the road. That's crazy. They're going to get killed. I almost hit somebody. And I'm like, well, look, they're not there for, forgive the language. They're not there for shits and giggles. They're not there for fun daredevil. They're because they know that either trees have pushed up the sidewalk and the city does nothing, or the scooters. You actually do a good job here with scooter corralling, but a lot of places it's the Wild West, and they know that's where the hipsters are, and 9 times out of 10 they're going to get 80% down the block and then be blocked by scooters. That fella is not there because he has a death wish or he lost a bet. He wants to get to where he's going on time before the rain comes. And sadly, again, I don't want to give you folks 1,000 slides. You're probably getting tired of my voice already, but if you look at the other edges, there's things blockading it. It's New Orleans. They have a lot of beautiful trees that buckle the sidewalks. And this poor fellow, he's actually with traffic. I'd probably be going against traffic so I could at least see what was going to get me. But next door to my home, where they tore down a perfectly nice house to build a McMansion, but that's a whole other philosophical. Every day there's a construction person there, and they park, and I call, and the police are like, I want to catch bad guys. I don't want to. This isn't mine. That's for like the kiddie corps, and it's like, it's your sworn job. And then I call the city council member, and they said, well, I sent my chief of staff out there for 2 hours. They sit in the car and caught up on their laptop, and they never saw anybody in a wheelchair. And it's kind of like, again, I'm not the greatest comedian. It's like, it's like, whatever, whatever, the single-family home had horribly insidious, bigoted graffiti all over it, and a person of color didn't choose that one. It's like, hey, hello, it's like, yeah. You're not going to see a whole lot of people with disabilities or elderly or walkers when you blockade their entire thing and make them go out. And even though I live on a fairly quiet street, we get maniacs that go 45 on that. Another one of my pet peeves. Everybody says, oh, this is the private sector, Steve. Just, you got enough work on the parks and work on the highway overpasses and work on the crosswalks and all that. Don't. That's in a public right-of-way. Those people pull a permit. Most areas they have to pay a fee per table or they get a cut of revenue. This is Miracle Mile in Coral Gables. It was also got a big comeback. Ironically, I think we all know this term of art, they did a complete street project. They took away part of the parking. They widened it. They put in pavers, which I'm not a fan of. But this restaurant, and I just did a quick cutaway, there's about 30 tables, every one of them a high top. And they come back to me and say, but that's Tap 42 or whatever. They're corporately owned and we can't get them. And it's like, can I be deputized to be the code enforcement person or the building department for the day? Because I'd grab every one of those things at the stroke of midnight and they'd be paying me $400 a table to get them back out of hock, and I'd probably call the newspaper. It's just, again, I hate it when regulatory people or elected officials do this disingenuous, like, not my job, or well, that looks like private sector. No, that's a public right-of-way. And the irony is, half the time, because they like the almighty dollar, they'll put another row of tables. So a sidewalk that doubled in width is actually reduced down to 18 inches wide for mobility, which is, it's just a procedures thing. That's not even a design thing. It's just having someone in code enforcement feel like they should care and writing them up. And not just saying, if you cure it in 30 days, the fine's waived. That's not, I don't want to be draconian, but if you're going to keep blocking dignity and access, I think you have a bill to pay. 10 years old, Miami-Dade County, about 2.8 million people, about 3.3 if we count undocumented. This is the health center, pretty much where everybody gets prenatal care, where gets your tetanus shot, gets your STD clinic, you're just all these different services that keep us healthy for folks that don't have the great golden health insurance plan, which is about half of us anymore. Architect, it got to lead gold, hey, but there. The ramp is a city block away and it's a big buzzer, and the buzzer works about half the time. And about the other half of the time, the security guard thinks it's just kids hitting the buzzer for fun, so you just sit out in the rain. Even if you're not a visitor there, think about maybe you're the deputy, what have you, and the person over you retired and you want to ascend, right? Where do you make your points? You walk out with the boss to the parking lot. You walk out with your supervisor or the project manager to lunch. Who wants to feel like an idiot? Oh, yeah, that's right, buddy. Okay, you roll back there and hit the big button and catch up to us. Oh, no, we're 2 blocks away, and I ran into Dave. I'm going to lunch with Dave. You can sit at the little boys' table or the little kids. This happens. This is not just harping in the wind. This is stripping of dignity. People wonder why there's U.S. Department of Labor stats about underemployment and unemployment for people with disabilities. It's not because they're lazy or stupid or incapable. It's because we throw up all these things. There are subtle differences. I grew up, I'm old enough, I grew up with a Sears and a JCPenney. Every picture of everybody in it looked like me. It was horrible marketing. Finally, now there's people of color and different looking people. It's the same thing. It's not just the visitor that takes 2 bus stops to come in and get a tetanus shot. It's the world. Maybe you're the head nurse and you want to be the project manager on a special project to do immersion into a Haitian American community. How do you make your bones with the boss? So much of it's informal, it's socializing. You can do it, but you're going to come second class. So if the person has this much prejudice or unease, you're reinforcing the stereotype by design. Am I running out of time?
Close.
Yeah, I know. Again, brand new art museum. I actually helped with the bond issue because I was working for elected official time because we wanted to activate the park, and they gave us a whole bunch of steps, and then we got the Berlin Wall for the egress. It's way separated away. People park bikes in there. It's just wide enough. I have seen a couple specialty chairs that actually scrape on that, so you can never visit the brand new museum. And it's also so high, those high walls. Skateboard, we all know, any urban situation, anything that's not flat, skateboarders in, you could have $1 million fine, we'll cut your hands, they don't care, they go. You can't see what's going to come hit you. Again, my former partner had rheumatoid arthritis. It's if a kid bumped into her knee, that's probably a knee replacement. It's not just to dust it off and curse the kid and go home and have Cheetos. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of my message is don't. No, 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 no. And yeah, yeah, obviously you need to make friends with the mayors and the commissioners and the council people because they're the ones that hold the power. But no, it's, again, it's just, you know, well, like that in Miami-Dade County, they went from 1 to 9 people in the 8A department, but they don't review plans. They don't work on the capital plan. Now every once in a while there might be a citizen says, hey, they're making a new bus stop and it looks like it's in the muck and the shelter looks too narrow or the bench goes all the way across. But it's serendipity. Now, yeah, when you have 9 people, how could one of them not be an architect, an engineer, or at least an AICP type? And why wouldn't your housing authority say, look, I don't expect you to look at every floor of everything, but hey, we're going to bring on 800 units of affordable housing. Does this, does this look like a real roll-in shower? Does this look like it would? No. And here's my other thing. Maybe I'll even stop here. We'll not worry about whatever comes last, but I'll end with this. Even more so than those departments, I think every major RFP, you can say the cutoff is $1 million, whatever, it needs to have I'll go more general, it needs to have a universal design consultant. Maybe I'm feathering my own nest because I'm not an attorney and I admittedly say that most of my examples are the mobility area. That's my, Miles Davis didn't play guitar, so Steve's not as versed with some of the other disabilities. But, why not start at the start and have a universal design consultant? In Miami-Dade, we have an ADA barrier removal, but you basically just attest that you can do that. So all the gigantic, no offense if these are your firms, but all the HDRs and Atkins and everything, they get qualified and they give it to an intern who says, yeah, it looks like it ain't gonna fall down, move it along. I don't know about here, but in Miami, we have geotech people, we have maintenance of traffic people, we have lighting people, we have, structural, we have life safety subs, we have every sub on earth, ground penetrating radar, surveyors. What would it hurt to say, 3% of the contract needs to be a universal design expert? And to qualify for that, there's some actual teeth. You don't just fly a person in from the Milwaukee office of Atkins and say, yeah, there was a restroom that we demoed and I kind of oversaw it, I Google drove it and go home. There needs to be local specialists. I think that starts it at the start. Because obviously the architects in the room next door, I talk about architecture some, but most of this is the civic realm. I think you start at the start and have anything that's over $1 million is, as a expert as part of the team. And again, their qualifications are not just draw a picture of a wheelchair ramp. They have to have some chops. I might be over my time here, but.
Hang on, can everybody hear me okay? I don't know if the 2 microphones are interacting well. So we're going to move, I think we're going to go ahead and move into Q&A. I know this has been pretty interactive in terms of you all have been able to ask your questions as we've gone along, which is good. So if there are no additional questions, that's great. But if this is a designated time for questions, so we'd be happy to take those for a couple of minutes. And then we will be in this room, as I kind of foreshadowed before, so everybody will be joining us in here as that session wraps up. So you don't really have anywhere to go, which is nice for us as this group.
Yeah. Pretty much anybody that's been with me has said they have no way to go, so. I'm sorry, you'll stump me. You'll ask me something I have no clue, but go ahead. It's like you would think I could say, oh, there's 80% of places or 60%, and I don't want to be gloom and doom and say no one, but the only thing that first comes to mind, and it's been a long time since I've been out there, Berkeley, which had Ed Roberts, almost like Mount Rushmore of disability advocates, and I know there's a center there that's right next to a BART station, and they have what? They've got their Center for Independent Living. They've got about 4 different agencies. And if you Google that, I can't think of the name of the building, but if you just Google Berkeley and Independent Living Center, because they were the original, or Center for Independent Living. They were the original CIL, I believe. But you just Google that. There's a San Francisco-based architecture firm. I think that was one of their first accessible commissions. It's actually become part of their stock and trade. But this thing's amazing. I mean, it looks like something out of the cover of Architectural Record. It's not ugly or gray or ham-fisted or rotting wood. I mean, there's this ramp, and it's got to be like 10 feet wide that goes through the center, and it's painted red. It looks like my old client Architectonica. You know, it looks like something from South Beach. It's colorful. It has daylighting showering in from 3 stories. I mean, just, you know, it looks like a design studio. It doesn't look like this, oh, we're embarrassed, but we got to we don't want to get sued, so we'll let Wheelchair Willie in this kind of horrible, pejorative, dog's rear end approach, which unfortunately, I probably have an email now from somebody that's going to insult me talking that way. But no, if you want to see a baseline thing and again, you're going to move there and work for them. It's a gorgeous building. It's not this, again, I think maybe I got a chip on my shoulder, but I still see not just retrofitted, I see new build, accessible, inclusive things that look a little bit apologetic or a little bit of I guess it's like the architecture of begrudging. And someone's like, well, we got to do this, but we don't have to make it look fun. And it's like, yeah, you can. You can do both.
So my name is Michelle Hall. I'm the Chief Human Resource Officer at Meyer, and have the privilege to be here today to chat with you just for a minute and then introduce your keynote speaker for the rest of the event. So I wanted to start by just thank you for being here for this absolutely accessible Kent event and the opportunity for all of us to educate ourselves even further in the space and what we can do to have a positive impact in our community together. At Meyer, we consider our purpose to be enriching lives in the communities we serve. So both employment for people with disabilities as well as creating a great customer experience for people with disabilities are 2 avenues that we take really seriously in that space. And so I actually brought a really neat quote from Hendrik Meyer. That's Fred's dad, for those of you that don't know. And he said, "We at Meyer have prided ourselves on not waiting around for laws to force us to do what is right." And then that comes to life and was really reinforced for me when I learned that Fred Meyer was named to the Governor's Committee for the Employment of the Handicapped in 1964, which is almost 30 years before the ADA was passed. So there's really this long-standing rich history in our organization of doing the right thing for people. And now we've really brought that to life in training and educating leaders in our stores as to how they can create great opportunities for people with disabilities each and every day. We have well over 200 jobs in every Meyer store that you set foot in, and so we have tremendous opportunity to have an impact in this space. In the early 2000s, our now president and CEO, Rick Keys, had the opportunity to go to a conference and hear Randy Lewis speak. And that was really an inspiration to the work that we then embarked on under Rick's leadership to really embrace hiring people with disabilities in our distribution facilities and supply chain network jobs. And so I'm here today to introduce Randy. Him and Rick have become good friends over the years. And Randy has really inspired a lot of the work that we've done at Meyer. So Randy is a consultant, Fortune 50 executive, retired, I believe, and self-described as an accidental disability advocate. So as the Senior Vice President of Logistics and Supply Chain at Walgreens, Randy initiated a new generation of large-scale distribution centers like no one in the world. The objective was to incorporate the latest technologies and innovative management without incurring additional costs while also employing large numbers of people with disabilities. So I'll let him tell the rest of his story today, but really appreciate the opportunity for Randy to speak to this
a few
group.
times, and I'm essentially going to tell you a story, and I hope you see yourself in it. That's the objective. And before we start, I ask you to think of the time in your life when you were the most idealistic and hopeful. You remember those days? We all had them. We just may not remember. But think about that, because that will help you see the story for what it is. Now, How many of you have children? Michigan's in good shape, looks like. Here's my family. We have 3 children. Girl, boy, girl. Our son Austin on the right is now 34 years old. He hadn't had a picture made since he was 20, so he looks a little different now, as we all do. Austin has autism. He was diagnosed at age 3. We noticed that he wasn't talking. He would tend to run away from women. He would be attracted to any man in a uniform. But he could remember anything. My dad would come up from Texas, and Austin wouldn't talk. He was only 2, but he knew how to get home from wherever my dad drove him. So he would just point, and he would do that. Now he didn't speak. He didn't speak at 3, 4, 5. He started speaking at age 10. And if you ever get a chance to talk to him, you will think he's making up for lost time. He is an expert on The Simpsons, 1980s cars, American Airlines, and social justice, especially racial discrimination. For some reason, he's picked up on that. He drives. He was the first student in our Barrington, in our school district, first student with autism to learn how to drive. He went twice through the written part where you do in the classroom, because he wanted to make sure he got that. And he went twice through the driving part, because we wanted to make sure he did that. And we even hired an extra guy to be our own guy to take him around, Mr. Rivera. I remember it. And I remember telling Mr. Rivera, I said, Austin's very sensitive to criticism. So if you can just be positive, that will go a really long way. Of course, that works for everybody, but I told him about Austin. It's going to work a lot better for you if you just kind of be positive. So they go out that day, and they come in, they pull in the driveway, and Mr. Rivera is sitting in the driver's seat side, and Austin has driven the car up. And I go to Mr. Rivera, I said, were you able to give him a lot of encouragement? And he said, yes. And Austin gave me a lot of encouragement too. This was the best ride I've had. And Austin is my chauffeur sometimes to the airport, because he's a lot cheaper than a cab and a lot more reliable. And he'll get up early in the morning, and he'll carry the bags down, or he'll pick me up late. But when he carries the bag, we get to the airport, every experience is the same. We get in Chicago traffic. We're driving like crazy, especially post-COVID. We get to the airport, we'll pull up to the United Terminal, and we stop. And every time, I will turn to my son and say, Austin, you got me here on time, and you got me here safely. And oh, by the way, I didn't tell you I paid him $20 for this. So I say, you got me here safely, you got me on time. Thank you, and I love you. And Austin every time will turn to me and say, $20. You've got, as charming as he is, he has lots of issues. He probably reads at a 6th grade level. I've never played a game with my son, not even a game of catch. He has no peer friends. He's never received an email. And until Sunday night, how many days ago was that? 2 days ago? He had never received a phone call. So he has lots of challenges, and I think the one thing I've learned about anybody that has a child with a disability, I learned a lot of us share the same wish, to live one day longer than our child, because we know what's ahead. If we could just do that. And it was in that thinking, I would lay in bed at night going, what's going to happen after we're gone? How can we make sure that he doesn't end up down there pushing a shopping cart with all his belonging in it? How do we stay safe? Who's going to do something about this? And I thought, well, Walgreens, I've been working at Walgreens. I was a big deal there. By the way, anybody getting ready to retire? Well, if you do, let me tell you, it's a long step. It's a rented tuxedo for sure. But if Walgreens couldn't do something about it, who could? And if I couldn't do it in my division, I had responsibility over 10,000 people in all these centers across the country. If I couldn't do something, who would? And a lot of that was driven because I don't know if you can do this in Michigan, but in Illinois, you used to could be able to go into the classroom if they're in special ed, especially the early childhood program. Can you do that here? Can parents go in? They've stopped that in Illinois for privacy. But we got to go in there, and we were fully expecting that our child would be one of the ones with a difficult disability. And I saw all those other kids. And you come back from that saying, we have no problems. And it was thinking about those kids and their parents and those 200,000 employees Walgreens has across the country. They have children like that. And if I'm laying in bed at night thinking about it, what are they thinking about? That's what drove this effort. So we thought, well, let's do something. So we had all these centers, but we didn't know anything about disabilities. And I think I remember we had this meeting, and I made this great speech about we ought to do something. No plan, but just hopefully you go out, do good kind of thing. Well, it didn't, a lot of them didn't do anything, but the ones who did do something, well, we don't know what to do, so, but these people have agencies. There's these agencies. We're always giving money to these agencies, and they're trying to put people to work. Let's find an agency out there that has access to people with disabilities. And what we'll do is we'll just contract some of our ancillary work, not mission critical, and they can bring in their own bosses. Of course, we didn't know it was called an enclave. We'll have an enclave, and it'll be great. And we did it in about 6 buildings. And people gave us awards of what great citizens we were for hiring these groups of probably 20 people into each building. And a lot of companies still do that. So I was down in Dallas, and this woman comes up to me. I was on a visit, and she says, man, the enclave is really great. And we've given them badges like this, or like regular badges, and we've given them their T-shirts, and so they feel part of the team. And she showed me this picture. And I didn't know who this woman was, quite frankly. And I'm trying to figure out who in the hell is she that's telling me this. And she must have seen the confusion, because she said, oh, I'm not one of them. I'm their supervisor. I'm not one of them. And it hit with the force of harpoon. We got to do better. So we got to thinking. We've had these folks in their building. We've had contact with them. We know what they do. We maybe have not worked with them. But certainly, some of these folks can do mainstream work. So let's give it a try. Let's go out and ask our team members who would be a volunteer to work alongside, to be a peer coach for a person in our enclave we think will be successful. Give them a chance. We had more volunteers than we had people to place. And we did that. We did in different buildings. One of the folks we got, this fellow's name is Chuck. This was in our Pennsylvania center. Chuck has autism. He could drive too. I wonder if his dad paid him $20 to take him to the airport. But hadn't thought of that before. But one thing we knew about Chuck, he loved the color purple. And the reason we knew that is because in our centers we got all these plastic totes, and they're colored for that distribution center because they all get sent and get sorted out. But everyone has their color. I think what Pennsylvania was like a blue or something. But occasionally, the Perrysburg, D.C. was purple. So he's there in Lehigh Valley, and about once or twice a day, a purple tote would pass through his area. And Chuck would stop. He would make a little dance, better than me, and let everybody know that there's a purple tote. Something we've never seen before. So management thinks, well, is this appropriate behavior for the workplace? And thanks to B, it didn't take them long to work through the process. And it was essentially, well, first of all, is he performant? Yeah. Does he cause problems? No. That's also good. Does he help out when he needs to? Yeah, that's good. That's a good employee for us. And oh, by the way, which do we prefer? Dancing or complaining? Dancing. Let's go with dancing. What Chuck taught us is that performance comes in lots of different packages. And I talked to those two ladies that volunteered to be his coach, peer coach. And I asked them about Chuck. And they said all those things about how he is as a team member and a fellow worker. And I said, we have 500 employees here. Has anybody said a thing about Chuck? Make one of those snide remarks or the sarcastic remark about Chuck. And she said, no. But if they did, they're going to have a problem with us. Now we were making progress. So time goes on, and we're getting ready to build another generation of distribution center. And like Michelle said, we were going to make it the best technology. We could kind of change it how we want to because we were designing it. And we thought, well, why don't we just kind of open it up to try to make it as accessible as possible and without spending more money, because Walgreens, kind of like Myers, probably only makes 3 cents on the dollar, and everybody else in the world makes a lot more than that on the dollar, in case you want to know about retail. So in our business, that's called we're cheap bastards, but we call it efficient. So we can't spend more money. And why don't we just kind of open it up to try something new? But if we're going to do this, remembering they're not one of us, I'm not one of them, had to be same jobs. This wasn't going to be over there working by yourself. It's got to be same pay, same performance standards. Everybody says, oh, great, you can hire a person with a disability. That's great if you can afford it. And a lot of employers that even have great hearts and hire people with disabilities, they will tend to make them what we call mascots. They don't expect that performance because their team members can carry it. We were looking to demonstrate to the world without a doubt that people with disabilities can perform as well or better. And there's not going to be any of them. Same jobs side by side. Everything. And if we needed to make accommodations for people with disabilities, we would make that accommodation for everybody. For instance, have y'all ever been in a disciplinary session? As a giver or taker? I've done both. Every company has the same process. You get called in with your boss, probably, somebody from HR. They go through the offense. They tell you, here's what's going to happen if if it's not fixed, or what. And they may suggest ways you can fix it. And you go through that, and then there's a place for you to sign. You put your comments in and sign it. That's the process for everybody. So what we realized, a lot of our people with disabilities, especially cognitive disabilities, really didn't get much out of that process. And I know for sure because Rick Keys, what Michelle was talking about, was at my house for a meeting with disabilities, and Austin wanted to meet Rick Keys. So he drives from Chicago, comes out there, says hello to Rick, hi Rick, goes back home. And I thought, this is great, until I got in his car one day and saw one of these forms. No call, no show. He had gotten a discipline on that day because he figured he was with the president of the company. I guess I can go have a day off because I was with the president of the company. So we said, guess what? If people are having problems understanding this, because Austin didn't understand it, he would have done much better with a fellow worker in there with him, or a parent. We said, why don't we do that? And oh, by the way, why don't we do that for anybody? Everything we would do for everybody. And to demonstrate that when somebody comes in here, can people with disabilities do it? We're not going to have mascots. 1/3 of the workforce is going to be a person with a disability. Remembering Chuck, those 2 coaches per, and that was the goal. And when we made the announcement, you would have thought we cured cancer. It made news across the country. We were going to hire 200 people in this one building with disabilities, 200 to 600. And it went across the country, and I thought, is the situation so bad that 200 hires in this little town in South Carolina makes national news? And it did. And one of the people who heard it was Desiree. Desiree was in San Diego. She has a rare muscle condition that required that she use a walker every once in a while. And she's working as a temp at this financial agency. And one day she comes into the work with her walker. And her boss says, what's the deal with the walker? And Desiree says, well, I don't need it all the time, but I do need it sometimes. And he said, great, come back when you don't. Desiree picked up her family in Southern California, San Diego, moved her family across the country to South Carolina a year before we opened to establish residence for the chance to apply. And today, she is a manager in that building. And people ask us, well, and people, if you're talking to people about hiring people with disabilities, they wouldn't go, well, what kind of people with disabilities can you hire? They start with a disability instead of starting with the job. So, what kind of disabilities did we hire? I remember when we started, because I was thinking autism would be the tough one, because I was most familiar with that. I've learned that's not true. I've gotten to learn a lot of 3-letter initials for different kinds of conditions. I remember the one that was most interesting was mental illness. Our HR person said, it's mostly a challenge to see if I was really going to be inclusive across the board. Are we going to hire people with mental illness? And that's because that's kind of a scary one, mental illness. And again, I thought through it. I thought, well, I am sure we have people who are paranoid, have shifting personalities, have OCD, explosive anger disorder. And I was just going through the senior executive row. Why not? So we did it. Now, we can't hire every person with autism or every person with every disability. We haven't found a single disability we can't hire because everything's a spectrum. It depends on the person and the job. And that's what we did. And so we got some great employees. This is Angie. She has CP. She graduated in graduate school at Clemson and all A's, summa cum laude. She had 30 job interviews, not a single job offer. Because she explains it, she walks, she calls it her sexy walk and her sexy talk. Because she has some challenges on both sides. So she says, well, I would go into that interview, as soon as I walked in, I could see the oh my God look on the person's face of how they're going to deal with me. Not a single job offer. Yes, ma'am. Cerebral palsy. Cerebral palsy. And I realized everything's a spectrum. She's high functioning in that she can walk and she can talk. That's not true for she's on the high end. She couldn't find a job, and she is the best HR person I've ever worked with. She is now running her own building in Georgia, and we would have missed out on her. Or Harrison has autism. He came out of the school system. He can perform at 50% of standard on a regular basis, but he can't multiply. And I know that because I was asking him how fast he could go. And he says, Randy, I can do 10 a minute, 10 in the process. And I said, we don't measure in minutes. Harris said, we measure in hours. How many can you do in an hour? He goes, I don't know. And of course, I had to think, okay, 10 times 60, 600. I do know that our standard was 400, and he does 50% more. He wouldn't even have gotten through the application because that's on our application. We realized we had all these walls built up for nothing. So that's the number of people in that one building. That's the 200 people. You'll see somebody that looks like you. All kinds, all different, but all fantastic. Now, how did they do? Kind of a spoiler, I'm here talking to you about it, so let's hope they did well. So we decided, let's publish the data because we want to get this out to the world, because this was something, the power behind this whole effort is we were doing something that was good for the business, but it was good for the community. And nobody wanted it to fail. And we wanted to be able to demonstrate, because peers deal with peers. We wanted to do peer-to-peer. Hey, come see it. Here's what we found. Performance was the same. A lot of companies are finding it's better. Turnover is 50% less. During COVID, it was 4 times better for people with disabilities than with typically able. I remember in our Perrysburg, D.C., they would close with the Ohio Turnpike. It'd be all the people with disabilities, or a lot of them, would call up and say, well, I'm walking in then. Because that's they wanted to be there. It's the force that's called the loyal workforce. People are starting to use that term. And everybody's looking for it. Better, less turnover, less absenteeism. Safety, number one concern of employers. I've talked to a gazillion people. What's the first thing they say? That's great, but we have a lot of hazards. And we're really worried about safety. We're 70% better. All those kinds of hazards, fall, electrical, pinch. I'm now, since I haven't dealt with them in 10 years, that's something I don't have to deal with anymore. We had all those kind of things. 90% of our safety people, leads that are teaching new people are people with disabilities. Why are people with disabilities safer than typically able people? Can you guess? What's that? part of everyday life. Well, they follow the rules. That's what's incredible. They follow the rules. You know, every accident, most accidents don't happen because they don't know it. We get in a hurry. I mean, it's like we had a guy that was trying to play Tarzan, trying to get through our racks one time, and you know, he fell and got hurt. I went, wow. You know, we had to fire him, but what a guy. I'd like to go have a beer with him sometime, but that's a different thing. So that came part of it. So when this happened, we wanted to spread it to the other DCs, so we brought in all the other GMs, general managers, and they got to see and ask all their questions. And so they started doing it too. And so it went from there to every other DC in the United States, in Puerto Rico. And today, that original number looks like this. 1,000 people with disabilities. And one thing we wanted to do is that would give this power, and we announced this on the very beginning. Walgreens never used to let anybody in the outside go into their centers. We told ourselves, I remember asking about that when I got to Walgreens, why don't we do that? Well, we have very good technology. We don't want anybody to know it. Now, I've heard a lot of the people say that, and I've been in their buildings, and I think we don't want to let people know how bad we really are, too. So we would never let anybody into our buildings. And I made this announcement to 5,000 store managers in Las Vegas at an annual meeting. I told them we were going to build this building. They'd never invited a supply chain guy to that meeting because, quite frankly, have you ever been to a Walgreens store? Okay, sure. Were we in stock on every item that you needed? Oh, that's the new regime. We used to be. No. Yeah. No. That's the key thing in retail, staying in stock of the right stuff. In most customer problems, well, pharmacy is their insurance company, but anything else in the front end of the store is being out of product. That was my fault. So do you think I'd get invited to their meetings to speak to them? No, but I had something good to tell them. And I told them that we were going to do this, and I told them that we were going to open the doors to the world and give everything away. And guess what the reaction was? This is the best thing we will have ever done. And at the end of that meeting, in my talk, I said extemporaneously, because I know it's about 1 out of 5 families have a person with a disability. So it's rooming around. So imagine 5,000 of them out there. I said, if you know somebody or hold somebody in your heart with a disability, stand up, not knowing what was going to happen. And the room got quiet. Boom, 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 boom. All around the room, 1,000 people about stood up. It was like pouring the balm of Gilead over the place. It wasn't a guy making a speech. It was about all of us calling on the best in us to do something good. The power of a good idea. And after that meeting, people would get me in the corner or say, I got this guy. He's going deaf. He's a cashier. He's going deaf. We're going to have to let him go because we get the calls. Get to another guy from another part of the country. He says, we got this deaf guy. He's deaf, and so what we did is we took him off that cashier, put him on a different one. He didn't have to answer the phone because we usually rotate between. We just don't rotate him. That's where I'd get a problem and a solution across all this. That was the excitement. And when we made that announcement, people all over the country started writing us They'd hear it and they'd write the letters to Walgreens, and we put them on the wall. All the team that was designing this, we put them across the wall, these letters from parents and people talking about their child and what a difference something like that would make. So they knew that they were working on something that was important. Just give them the chance to do it. And of course people would, and then we started in the DC, when we started, somebody said, what if it doesn't work? I mean, well, actually, I remember the first person that I sat in as official matter was the board of directors. Because when we presented it to them, we had all the numbers and come in, we all got suits. Remember suits? The only reason I'm wearing this because last time, it was like 18 years ago, I got to wear these shoes. We had all the numbers and they looked out right, it's going to pay off. And then we said 1/3 of the people would be people with disabilities. And the board asked, what if it doesn't work? And we said, we'll adjust. And they said, okay. Which is the strategy. We all know how you can do something different from the regular way, go against policy. Big companies got policies and things. How you can do it on the DL without anybody giving you a problem. You just call it, it's a secrecy of, like in Harry Potter, that cloak of secrecy. They can't see you. We have that in business. It's called a pilot. So you say, oh, it's a pilot. Now, but when the team members and managers ask about it, what if it doesn't work? We say, we don't know it's going to work. It might fail. And here's the deal. If it does fail, it's going to be still the best project of your life. We will adjust if it fails. But we also had to tell them we are going to have failures. Some people, because we're going to give people chances that may not be successful. We're going to intern them for like 9 weeks on the job. See, we kind of select on the front end of people that think we know what the skills are and we think they're going to be successful. But if we need to go deep in the pool. Anybody can come in with some certain kind of disabilities or not a disability in our place. For example, deaf. That's one in our work. I tell people in distribution centers, they go, how do I start? And I said, well, the laziest way is hire one deaf person. Because they know every other deaf person in the community. Or you can hire a blind person. Those are the most, I don't know, we ought to give the armed services over to the deaf and the blind. Because they were really well organized. I said, they'll find everybody else for you. But we want to go deep. And we're going to have some failures, and we're going to have to let people go. So, if you can't figure out a way to make them successful, or if you can't, you need some help, kick it up. If it's a policy, kick it upstairs, and we'll try to go around it under this pilot. We'll adjust if we can. But if we can't, the standard is we want to sleep well at night. Because we've got to, if we're going to be same performance, same pay. And I remember we have visitors come and they tell a story. I'll tell you about this. They come and we put them in. This is in our first one. We call it the Las Vegas room. You know the story about Las Vegas. What goes on in Las Vegas stays in Las Vegas. Says, and the reason we call it that. Come bring all your skepticism. You've done a tour. You've talked about it. Now come bring your skepticism about this. Ask any question you want. And one guy, I remember one guy, there was the CEO of Best Buy's e-commerce. He said, well, I see all this great stuff. What's a bad day? And I thought, ooh, I hadn't heard that story. What am I going to hear? So the managers, they kind of go through it, and essentially the answer is this. A bad day here is when I come in with my problems, when I come in mad. Have you ever driven to work mad? Where you wish, you get the parking lot and you wish you could kick your dog? That's before work. It says, a bad day is when I come in with my problems, because one of the following will happen. Either people will shut down, not good. Some people will come up to me and tell me I'm a jerk. That's not good. Some people will come up and hug me. So I've learned when I'm here, it's not about me, it's about us. Wow, that's certainly true in my case with Austin. That lesson that our children teach us, Austin has taught me infinite patience that I would have never had, because I got all these things going on in my head. He's got his patience. Any of you have children with disabilities? Patience is kind of like, that's kind of the starting point for all this. So we let them all come in, and we told the people, do what you can. So here's a story about that. He said, well, what about accommodations? What do? You have to fire people. I said, yeah, we do. So one manager tells the following story. We had this young man, Timothy. He didn't know this disability, but he had issues about people being around him. I don't know a specific disability, and he worked on a line that was people probably 6 feet apart, and it's fast. What they're doing is preparing cases for those little pieces that you buy at Walgreens. We take them out and we pick them out one by one, so that store gets one out of 144. We get them all set up so the person can pick that one later. It's called decanting. I learned that from Rick Keys. It sounds like a good job. We call it detrashing at Walgreens, but I thought that decanting, man, hey, maybe we can hire some more people for less. They think it's a good job. So anyway, it's a fast job. You use a knife with it occasionally. So Timothy was there, and somebody from Custodio came pushing a broom down and came in his area, and he went berserk. He had his knife, and he's nonverbal, and he was yelling because he was upset, and rightly so. His manager, now instead of taking him and saying, well, you can't do that, Timothy, all that, no. What he did is he got masking tape around his area, put letters, I think those birthday letters or whatever, and it says Tim's workstation, Tim's station up there, so you could see it from a long way. And then he got a 2x4 from Lowe's, because Lowe's hires people with disabilities too, and one of those remote doorbells, and put it on the corner. And he put a sign there, and it says, 1, ring doorbell. 2, wait for Timothy to invite you in. And they gave a card to Timothy and trained him on, 1, when you hear doorbell, put box cutter in apron, turn to door, invite guest in. Timothy was not ultimately successful for other reasons. But do you think the manager could sleep well at night? And what do you think was the impact on his fellow workers who see a manager, a boss, instead of saying, my way or the highway, you can't do that, this, to go through that trouble, that discretionary effort to try to make him successful? That's what happened. So a lot of these companies came. Here's some of them that have done things. Now, Meijer really is one of my favorite companies. Not because I Because Rick Keys, I really met him when somebody else was talking. I was making a speech at an industry thing, and he was there, and I was talking to the Lowe's guy, and I met him, and I said, "Would you like to do this?" He said, "Well, I think I heard you speak somewhere else, and we thought it was a good idea at Meyer, so we just did it." I went, "Whoa! You mean you didn't have to see it?" I mean, that's incredible. Now, that made me really like him a lot, but what made me love him, see, I couldn't, for Austin, my son, we didn't have any DCs near us. And quite frankly, if it had been, I was worried if I put him to work in a DC, everybody says, "Oh yeah, easy for you, kingpin, you get to do it. The reason you're doing it is for give your son a job." I didn't have an I can be real high. I didn't have an opportunity, so I didn't get the chance. But the reason I'm glad I didn't, because I didn't want to have to answer that question. Because everybody would think, well, you're only doing it because you're a dad. You're trying to get your son something. So 8 years ago, I remember this. 8 years ago, Rick Keys calls me up at home. And Austin was not working at the time. He was working at a Walgreens store, part-time. He said, "We're building the DC in Pleasant Prairie on the border of Wisconsin. And I don't know where you live in Chicago, but if Austin can get there, we got a job for him." Because he had met Rick Keys at my house today, and no call, no show. So that was his interview, I guess. So this summer, Austin celebrated 8 years of perfect attendance. Do I love Rick Keys? Do I love Meyer? Yeah, it's personal. That's what this work does. This is the best kind of work we can do. And I'll finish up with what convinces people when they come see it. They get to talk in the Vegas room. They hear managers talk like what it's like to manage here. And so this was made by a film student when he graduated, who's now a producer in Hollywood. And he did, for his project, he got all his buddies. He heard about this. So he got all his guys work for free. That's what they do to students. So he said, "Well, I got to do my project, and this sounds cool. So we're going to go down and make a film." Now, he thought he was going to make a film about disabilities, and a lot of films are like that, about people with disabilities and the impact on those. He made that film, but he also made his own film, which was about the managers talking. So I'm going to show you, this is a short 2-minute thing, of managers in that first building. What is it like to work here? And what is it like to manage here? What's the impact on culture? So we think it's going to be loud enough? Well, we'll find out. Is it going to come on or not? There we go. Why have power if we don't use it for good? In 2007, Walgreens launched a new generation of distribution centers like no other in the world. The objective was to build the most productive center ever and to employ a large number of people with disabilities.
The one element that I've never allowed into my management style, nor into any facility that I've ever been into, and that's managing with love, managing with care, managing with a heart. That's the big change here.
It's all about the people.
To manage and be successful in our building, you have to focus on the individual.
Everybody has a different motivator, and it's up to the manager to find out what that motivator is.
Takes a lot of creativity and to come in with no fear.
I am allowed to be creative with the team members, that it's not a hardline stance to where either you get it or you don't get it. It's an opportunity to see what the issue is and work with that team member.
That relationship that you make with an individual, whether they have a disability or not, makes or breaks that person's success.
We are very focused in this building on making folks successful.
As far as the key indicators that we look at for safety and productivity, we are the number one in our division.
We started each day as one. When Daryl made production, we all made production. When Melissa did excellent at accuracy, we all did excellent with accuracy. When John worked safely, we all worked safely.
It changes the whole culture of a building. You will have a team that thinks about other people before they think about themselves.
We've all been changed.
It's made me a better manager. It's made me a better man. It's made me a better father and a better husband.
I'm a better leader because of it. I got more compassion, got more patience, which has not always been a strong suit of mine. I see folks for who they are now, as opposed to what they look like.
People with disabilities perform the same jobs, earn the same pay, are held to the same performance standards as everyone else. The center is the most productive in the company's history. Over 30% of the workforce has a disability. Most had never been able to secure a steady job before. The idea spread, and within 4 years, over 1,000 people with disabilities were working in centers across the country. We're getting ready to, I'll give you some time for questions if you have any. I brought about 20 copies of a book. I wrote when I retired, I wrote a book. When it came out, it was listed as one of 10 new books you need to read this year by Fast Company. And I brought these here, and I think if you want to read the story, you can do that, because I wrote it. I didn't write it to be famous or be patted on the head. I wrote it because this work is important, and we need to be reminded of how we do the power of doing something for us, not me. So y'all if you want to do it, you give me $5, which is a lot less than I paid, but that's okay. 5 or 10, but whatever you do. I got about 20 of them. If you want it, I'll sign it for you if you like that, and if you don't, so you can pass it on and not blame anybody. And it's going to go to a good cause. So just let me know after this. If you have any questions, does anybody have any questions? I'm sorry I took you so long, y'all are so kind. I told you more stories than I've ever told anybody else. Most of them are true. And I was really kidding about paying them less, because I know you reacted bad to that about the box cutter guy. I apologize. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Maggie Carricker, and I'm actually a critical care nurse and a mother of a son who sounds very similar to your son. And the reason that I came today was to find some hope for finding him some employment, because it's a challenge as they get older. He's 36. And I wanted to thank you for giving me a little bit of hope.
Thank you. Anybody else? Here you go. We got one here too.
Thank you for your story. My question is, how do you? I saw what you did with the managers, but as an advocate, I heard from a parent who had their child employed, and because the management changed, they started to harass the child with a disability. How can I help her fix that problem?
Well, that's their problem to fix. I mean, what does management say about that? Those folks doing that?
Well,
are they thinking that this is the victims is the problem?
Pretty much. So they wound up firing the young person who was taught to do a specific job and was doing good. I had never had any issues until a new manager came, and they wanted the person to do something else, but had never trained them to do something else, or got a new job coach to show them a new skill. So they picked on him and picked on him, and they fired him. And now the parent is working with EEOC to try to get the problem solved, but nobody will answer her. And the child still doesn't have a job.
We can talk a little bit later about that, but one thing I think you heard there, we used to be, our managers got to make numbers. You know, and the guy said, we make production, that's the standard work. If you can't make the numbers, you can't stay. What you heard the other guy, he said, it's making other people successful. That's what they view their job now. If I make everybody successful, all the numbers will take care of itself. It's kind of like in shoveling. If you fill the back end of the shovel, the front end of the shovel will take care of itself. That's what they talk about. And that's the change in the managers. Because now their focus is not making the number. My focus is making you successful. That's an attitude thing. And that's good management regardless of disability or not. That's why everybody, but here's what's the great thing about people with disabilities. You don't have to give all these managers this training, which they sleep through half the time anyway, right? You give a person with a disability, they connect because we connect at a human level. There's nobody, I don't know anybody that doesn't have a hard time to find. But they bring out our humanity and they want to make them successful. That's why they put the masking table. You don't think that manager is going to tell that story to all his generations? They train us. They bring humanity back in the workplace. They bring out the best in us. If you can kind of get that message across. But they have to make that decision.
Very good stories. Thank you for this. But with the onslaught of AI as it comes on, do you see how it can be beneficial or how it could be a challenge? And especially with HR, even able-bodied people have a hard time getting past the first steps of a job interview with AI being the first person that interviews
Right.
you. But is it seen as something that could be beneficial, or is it seen as something that's going to be even more challenging as you keep your workforce employed?
If companies, and Walgreens had this too, you cannot apply unless you apply online. And we got all kinds of questions in there. And my son would not do well at any of them. What we do is if you can get through that process, any person with disability, you can get through the standard process, which eventually we talked about earlier, is our typical process is credentials, and that's what that gives you. And it maybe gives you some personality, but then the final interview is fit. So essentially how we get hired, traditional people, typically able, is credentials and charm. That's not by the way, does your job description match what you do? So what we do is we say, we know this group of people, the Austin Lewises and all these other folks, can't get through that door. If they can, fine. But we have a working interview instead. If you're serious about hiring people with disabilities, that's what you're going to do, unless you can find people that get through this that we call passing. They can pass this if they're neurotypicals or not. We have a different door, so we have a 9-week internship. They can come either way. But that's what you have to start thinking about, an alternate door, because you will screen inadvertently talent away. Because just take a picture on your iPhone, that's your ideal candidate. I tell people, I take a picture of myself and I say, here's the ideal candidate. Because we look for people like us. And that's a very good question. Thank you. Anybody else? Because y'all have a happy hour after this, right?
I wanted to thank you for your talk today. I really appreciated it. I'm a occupational therapy student, and so this topic is interesting to me because this is a population that I'll hopefully be working with once I graduate. I my question, I'm curious about how you work to avoid a savior complex in the managers and the like admin and kind of like higher up staff, because there's this interesting dynamic between like this is a population that it's really important that we include, and we want to have more people with disabilities in our hiring, but then you also really, I assume, want to be mindful of avoiding like look at how great we are and we're doing this stuff and we're saving these people that don't have jobs. So I'm wondering if there's training on that for the managers or at an administrative level, or how you kind of address that.
Well, I know it's savior complex sounds, but that's not our experience. I think the experience is you got right there. I'm made better. I'm not, I was not like that. I'm different. It's we call it the Shazam effect. Matter of fact, been doing a study for like 10 years about that. You don't have to give all the training, just empower people and tell them what the goal is. What we do in our review of people, we do it once a month and go through all 600 people, or all the people in every building. The managers do. And they go through real quick and they see the numbers, and when they see a number that they're not doing well, every manager knows the question is going to be, what have you done to make them successful? That's what the question is. And so they've already anticipated that, so they can answer it saying, we're doing this. But it's focusing on people. The savior complex, if people will hire people with disabilities, I can tolerate their savior complex. Because I don't see because you do feel good when you make a difference in somebody's life. That's part of happiness, along with family, friends, service. They see that but we are the benefit. I have benefited more from Austin than he has from me. He has made me humbler. He is. The world needs more Austin Lewises than they do Randy Lewises on the impact, because everybody he deals with, he has a positive impact on them and doesn't know it. Who has no desire to be known. He just doesn't want to get old. That's why he doesn't like to show his ID at the airport. And he comes up with new words for people, or things. He had like orange spring, that was fall. That was when I was a little kid. Bottom sneeze was one of the first words he invented. Everybody knows what his latest one is, because he doesn't like showing the IDs, the ID beggars. That's what he calls it. Yeah, I don't like the ID beggars. So, and if I come in, I always chill when I'm with my son, because I know it doesn't work well when I'm not. One more?
Yeah, thank you very much for this talk. I wonder if you could reflect a little bit on the kind of some of maybe the facility challenges or the facility modifications that might have been required to do this kind of inclusive hiring project. I'm thinking about transportation to work, or workplace accommodations for disability.
That's an excellent question. Did everybody hear it? When we first started, transportation is a big issue. I mean, like the first thing. So we built a big canopy so people could wait for the bus in the rain. And then we talked to the city about routing a bus there. And they did. And some people and some companies don't. I mean, some bus companies won't do that. But in some of them they will. And on that one, I remember our real estate people came down and said, we ought to give them, $100,000 to do this, or contribute to this big project. And I said, no. They said, why not? I said, because it needs to be their success they get a chance to be part of this. You know, if you just accommodate them and make it easy for them, but with that, and the city did do it. Okay, but here's the deal: what we found out. So I'm there, and I'm really proud of this thing. And we're having some visitors come in, and the bus is getting ready to come, and there's hardly like 3 people waiting for the bus. And I said, I know we got 200 people with disabilities. Why aren't they riding the bus? And Angie, remember the gal in the video that you could hear her voice, the gal with CP? She said, you know, when you pay people a living wage, they can get to work. I went, wow. I mean, those things, a lot of the things, most of our accommodations are less than $20. We had a woman that she had CP and she had to push a button with a collar around it. You know what I'm talking about? It's raised. The button's flat here. And she had to push it. And because she had to push it and she didn't have the dexterity in her fingers to do it, she couldn't make what we call make rate, make production. Expert looked at it, didn't know what to do with it. Her manager went to Lowe's, got a socket that would go over the button, cut a broomstick that would fit over it, that sticks out, boom, boom, boom. When she's working that machine, she can work just as fast as everybody else. When she's done, she sets it over to the side. The creativity that comes after the fact. Now, we did do things like we put an elevator in between them. We have some ramps. The biggest one we did, because we were going to redo the system, we made our screens with icons. And now that all the writing and stuff, we tried to eliminate all writing. Let's make everything a symbol because it's easy to remember. And you see, that's probably the biggest one. But looking for ways and giving, most of the managers do it. That's what the accommodations are. The physical building is not a big issue for us. You know, we could do a better job on it with blind people, but gosh, I've learned a lot about people. Vision is incredible too. They can do a lot more than I ever expected. So I find myself surprised over and over again with my own prejudices, which is great. But that's a great question. But I did appreciate, I'm never going to Florida. I learned that from the last lecture. All right, well, I have kept, thank you so much for the gift of your time. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And $5 or $10, I only brought 20 because that's all I could carry, so. Thank you, Randy. Thank you.
Well, as we wrap up here, I just want to give a final thank you and round of applause for Randy and all of our other speakers this morning that helped to make this event as memorable as it has been for this wonderful 5th year. And also our sponsors as well. You see their logos represented throughout the building here. I won't go through the list, but be sure to connect with those folks because as I mentioned this morning, they play such an important role in the work that we're able to do, not just today with this event, with this content, but 364 other days out of the year in terms of supporting the work that we do in the community. And one of the things that I hope that we showed today, I know that we had a variety of different topics and discussed a variety of different instances, stories. I didn't want to foreshadow too many of those success stories that you would hear about, but I did mention this morning a connecting theme that I thought of. You know, it mentioned the 5th anniversary gift of wood. When people talk about celebrating a 5th anniversary, oftentimes couples will commemorate that with a wood gift because of its enduring strength, its lasting roots. And I think what we showed today in terms of roots is that when we root people with disabilities at the center of what we're doing, whether it is our architecture, whether it is our cities, or even our major corporations, corporate cultures, good things happen for all of us, and not just individuals with disabilities, right? And so, as has become tradition with this event, we like to highlight one organization a year, and that doesn't mean we don't work with plenty of incredible organizations, but we like to highlight a specific organization, a specific example right here in Grand Rapids of an organization that has really rooted accessibility and inclusion into its core values and as part of its strategy for success. So I'd like for us to take a few minutes here and meet some folks from John Ball Zoo. And we'll play this video here on our screen.
So we exist to save animals from extinction, and we're all about wildlife. We think the best place for wildlife is in the wild, so we connect with people to inspire their heart and inform their mind. And then where it shows up in our strategy is around being a well-run business. And one way you're a well-run business is to create safe spaces.
Universal design helps us with knowing that when we bring students up into the zoo, we know that everyone can access all of the spaces that we want, and they're all going to have an engaging experience.
Working with Disability Advocates of Kent County started almost a decade ago. We called up and said, hey, we're putting some different walkways. We have a very challenging site. Can you come and just kind of give us some ideas and thoughts?
It's one thing to go through building codes or standards and see what ADA is, but that's not why we're here. We're here to serve our community, and we need to have a deeper understanding of the needs of our community and how to design spaces that meet everyone's needs.
We want to make sure that our programming that we offer is accessible to everyone, whether that is how we interpret what's happening in the zoo and talking with guests, allowing them into our different areas, whether it's the petting corral, wallabies, so interacting closely with animals in a safe space for everyone.
There's been 3 projects in particular that we work with Disability Advocates of Kent County on. There are 2 boardwalks that we have in the zoo and the new entry area that we just recently opened up in 2020. Those are some big elevation area changes that we've been doing. Also, the pygmy hippo habitat, we've also added some things that are more tactile. We've actually got some unique viewing areas for people that have challenges. We make it part of the whole experience so everybody can experience it and enjoy it in a nice and fruitful way.
I talk about strategy. We show it as a wheel, and our why is in the center, and then our how is our core values, and then around the edge is our strategy. Safe spaces is defined as physically safe, emotionally, and inclusive. And then under people, we value people, and that's about creating a zoo for all.
The zoo receives training annually to help individuals that may be having sensory disabilities or just a different sensory experience than what some may typically experience, so that we could make the zoo accessible to everyone.
Disability advocates are true servant leaders. They serve the community, and with that partnership, it allows us to do great things. It allows us to serve our collective community.
Working with Disability Advocates has been awesome. They're not out there to ding you. They're not out there to go gotcha. They're out there to come alongside you to say, okay, this is your plans. This is how you're trying to do. Here's some ideas. Here's some thoughts. You know, add some extra rest areas. Oh, we like what you're doing here. Oh, could you look at this? So it's a very good, a collaborative relationship that's been very effective over the last decade here at John Ball Zoo.
So thank you to the zoo, and like I said, we work with many organizations throughout the year and over the years, as you heard there, that Almond said. And, you know, all of those relationships are special to us. One of the reasons we highlight these organizations each year is that it gives an example, it gives a flavoring of the kind of work that we can do to show that we want to partner alongside you, whether you've been partnered with us for decades, as my friend Almond said in the video there, or whether today is your first day thinking about accessibility and you've got some ideas and you'd like to run them by us and we can help you alongside that journey. There are a variety of different ways that we can come alongside you as Disability Advocates of Kent County, whether it's our trainings, our staff trainings, our consulting projects. We have a variety of different ways that we can support you. And so, like I said, we just like to highlight that kind of a flavoring to show in action the work and the impact that that can have. And before I dismiss us here today, I want to be sure to point out that this event, obviously celebrating its 5th year, I mentioned earlier this morning to the folks in this room that a 5-year run doesn't happen without the support of all of you guys. And with that, we recognize that we couldn't do this without you, and so that as we think about this event next year and future events going forward, we'd love to get your feedback in terms of what do you want to learn from us, what can we do, how can we make events like these better as we continue to provide content for all of you. And so we have a QR code, and I'm not exactly positive that the Wi-Fi is working super well in this particular space, but we would simply ask that you take some time and fill that out, because that really helps us to figure out how can we best meet you where you are. And certainly it goes without saying, I hope that you'll reach out to us if you have any questions, comments, things that we can help you with. As I mentioned, don't be strangers. And thank you again for making this event as incredible as it has been today. As I said, we couldn't do this without you. And with that, let's go continue to realize the vision of making absolutely accessible Kent. Thank you.